Also joining us live right now is Lester Munson from Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thanks for having me.
Now, sir, gut-wrenching visuals of human suffering coming in from the Gaza Hospital. IDF seems to be denying its involvement. But is anyone buying into this narrative? That's the big question.
Well, I think we need to have an investigation and see what the facts show. There does seem to be a decent case that this may have been a rocket fired from Gaza, possibly by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They were launching missiles from that very area. Their missiles are not of high quality and are known to misfire and have been known to kill Palestinians. That happens on a regular basis. So I don't know that what the facts are. I think they need to be determined, but I think we owe both sides a little grace in this terrible situation. And I think people should stop jumping to conclusions about how this happened and maybe let cooler heads prevail.
Also joining us right now is our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who is joining us from New York. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Susan, as you know, this situation, this unprecedented, shocking incident, it further complicates diplomatic overtures by the United States. U.S. President Joe Biden was, of course, is on a rather fraught trip to West Asia. How do you see the situation?
It was already on a weak wicket that he was going, you know,
and how do you see the situation now unfolding going forward?
Yeah, this was already a high-stake trip by President Biden going to the Middle East region, and now it's just become more complicated and complex after that attack on the hospital in Gaza. And as our guest rightly mentioned, we're still waiting to find out really what happened. But it really comes at a time when, unfortunately, Arab countries decided to go full-on jump to one side of the conclusion and accuse Israel of this attack, setting the framework and basically for President Biden not to meet with Arab leaders. First of all, we heard Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas cancel his visit with President Biden. And then shortly after, we heard that summit in Amman, Jordan was going to be canceled as well, where Egypt's President al-Sisi was also expected to take part in. We did hear from the White House through a statement that this was something that both sides had agreed on mutually because of those 3 days of mourning that due to that hospital attack. But nonetheless, you know, the situation has just become a lot more complex. It's very unclear what President Biden is going to Israel to do. He could have perhaps provided that kind of support that he has so far from Camp David. Would that have been more effective than going to Israel at this point, just on the brink of a possible ground offensive by Israeli troops? And while the White House has denied this, there are those that believe that because President Biden's going to be there, then Israel's military activities are going to be hampered, and they'll possibly wait until President Biden leaves, giving Hamas more time to plan for this incursion.
Susan, stay with us. I'd just like to go back to our guest, Mr. Munson. I just want to take this with you. It doesn't happen every day that a scheduled meeting with the US president gets cancelled. Has the Arab League turned their face away? Or are we seeing remnants of that right now? Are we seeing hints of that at the moment?
Well, I think this is a very volatile situation. A tragedy has happened. There's a reaction on the street to what people think they understand about the situation. That puts political leaders in a very difficult spot. There's no doubt about that. I am sure that the Biden administration is working behind the scenes right now to put back together these meetings and try to build some sort of path forward here for a successful resolution of this crisis. So I think we shouldn't jump to too many conclusions ourselves about the current state. It is certainly in chaos, but I expect professional diplomats, political leaders to say the things that they need to say and perhaps get to a place where they can reconstruct these meetings. It is important that folks get together and have discussions about humanitarian access and other aspects of what we are likely to see in the coming days. So while the situation is tragic, I'm a little bit hopeful that some of this can be put back together in the next few hours.
In fact, sir, I was just going to come to this. We've been analyzing the stakes of Joe Biden's visit as well. There was obviously buzz around a peace deal being in the offing, and now the hospital strike. What are the options now?
Well, it remains an opportunity for President Biden to show leadership and to show diplomacy and grace, but also toughness when dealing with radical elements like Hamas and possibly Palestinian Islamic Jihad here. So he needs to rise to the occasion. It's a very difficult situation. He's presumably on his way there right now, perhaps in the air. So it's a big task ahead for the American president. We'll see how he does.
All right, stay with us, sir. I'll just like to go back to Susan. Susan, is it almost certain now that Biden will return without a deal? It was already a fraught trip, as you mentioned earlier, and we have been discussing it. Is there anything that he would come back with in hand, and any type of normalization talks are out of the window now?
Well, it was unclear what kind of deal President Biden wanted to reach with Arab states. The issue that sort of went forward, and it's somewhat of a glimmer of hope, is Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said that President Biden agreed to visit Israel only after the Israelis agreed to let humanitarian aid go to Gaza for the Palestinian population that are not members of Hamas. This itself, by the way, is challenging considering the fact that the UN agency that provides aid to the Palestinians, UNRWA, tweeted that it does send aid. However, some of its aid, and this has happened before, was stolen by Hamas militants. Despite that, the president did get this kind of assurance from the Israelis before going there. So from the humanitarian aspect of it, perhaps some kind of corridor would be open. And then you have, the issue of the hostages. That's very important for the president to perhaps directly sit across the table with Prime Minister Netanyahu and, talk about the hostages. Again, perhaps a little bit of glimmer of hope if we can take their word. Hamas said that they're willing to release non-Israeli hostages. And then also, it's the issue that President Biden, I mean, this is something that's, it's been criticized somewhat, is President Biden wants to see the military map and plan of the Israelis for this ground offensive to ensure that it doesn't spill over to a greater conflict in the Middle East. But nonetheless, the fact that just the optics of the fact that these Arab leaders are not meeting with President Biden, I'm not sure. However way you look at it, it's just not a good look right now.
Not at all in the president's favor at the moment. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining in, Susan, at this hour. And we'll be in touch with you for more updates as the trip unfolds further for the US president. And Mr. Munson, just one last question with you. I want to come back. Now, Washington, Paris, Brussels, UN, WHO, we are seeing wide-scale condemnation against the carnage at the Gaza hospital. Would we see Israel on the back foot after this hospital massacre, or do you feel then it's not going to hamper their move forward?
Well, I think we have. It's a terrible situation. There's no doubt, and I think we've known since this terrible episode began several days ago that Israel was going to have to go into Gaza and root out Hamas and the rest of the terrorist infrastructure there, and that would be a very fraught exercise because there are innocent people who are there in Gaza. And that while this was necessary, there was going to be very bad consequences for it. That has been a known thing for quite some time. This has made that a little bit more acute. And so I think the task for President Biden, when he gets there, put back together some sort of diplomatic arrangement, work with Egypt to perhaps open that border to Gaza and maybe have some constructive things happen there, get relief for the Israeli hostages in Gaza, others who may be being held there. There's a lot of work to do. I think it's still a very good thing that the American president is going there. Hopefully some good will come of it.
All right. Mr. Lester Munson, thank you so much for joining us on the show with your insights and perspective on this.
Thank you.